Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be sharing my September wrap-up. Alright guys, so September was a really rough month for me. It was probably the hardest month I've had of all 2024, and I really can't get into too many details as to why that is. However, I will have some very big announcements towards the end of October, and I just can't wait to share everything with you guys. But with that out of the way, I will say I read some amazing books in September, so many 5-star reads. There is a dark romance on here that might be my favorite dark romance of all time. It is so unbelievably good. And then there was a fantasy romance that I had on my TBR for a while, and I ended up absolutely loving it. So I'm so excited to talk about these books with you guys, despite the fact that September was not my favorite month. But if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram, Goodreads, and Patreon, all linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about the books I read in September. And starting off with my Patreon book club pick for September, we have The Veiled Kingdom by Halle Renee. This is the first book in a spicy fantasy romance series. So in this story, we are following Naira, and she is the daughter of this tyrant king that ends up running away. Now, she is soon captured by this rebel group who don't know her true identity and end up giving her an ultimatum to either join them or die. So she reluctantly agrees to join them, and now this is very dangerous because if they find out who Naira actually is, she could be used against her father. Now, she ends up having a bit of a romance with the son of the rebel commander named Dacker, and he is slowly trying to uncover the mysteries of Naira, and it's their romance. So, once again, I actually did really end up enjoying this book. I was a little bit worried because I didn't love Halle Renee's previous series. My only issue with this book is the main male character, Dacker. He is very suspicious of Naira from the get, but he is the one who captured her and forced her to join this rebel group, and then almost seems to want to punish her for her being secretive and joining this rebel group, even though he is the only reason she is there. So I found that kind of frustrating, but other than that, I love the angst, I love the romance. The ending I was not expecting at all, so I'm very much looking forward to the sequel to this book. But overall, I gave this a 4-star. And next up is The Wren in the Halle Library. Now, I've had this book on multiple TBRs. I kept pushing it off because I was pretty sure I was not going to end up enjoying this book. I am so happy I read this because I gave this 4 stars. I really liked it. I thought it was very unique. I will say I do not think this is very much a Beauty and the Beast reimagining like it is pitched as. There are some very subtle nods to Beauty and the Beast, but for the most part, I didn't really get that. But I did love the story. So in the story, we are following Kirce, who is a thief, and in her world, monsters and humans kind of coexist. So anyway, Kirce ends up breaking into this house only to discover the house is actually inhabited by a monster. So this monster is named Graves, and he gives her an offer that, hey, I won't kill you. Instead, I want you to help me rob something because you're apparently a very good thief, and you were able to get past my wards, which shouldn't be possible. So Kirce agrees, and she starts to train under Graves, and it's their romance. But what I don't hear this book talked about is there is so much Celtic mythology in this book, and it is just so beautifully written, and once again, I just really enjoyed it. I will say, there are parts with the romance that I feel like were kind of unnecessary. Like, there is a steamy scene that comes out of nowhere. Not that I have anything against, like, spicy scenes, it's just with this particular one, it just felt like it did not belong in this book. But overall, I really enjoyed this. So if you've been kind of hesitant to pick this up, I highly recommend giving this a try. And next up, I read Blood Orange by Karina Halle. I've had my eyes on this book for so long, and the audiobook finally released, so I picked this up immediately. And I also really ended up enjoying this. This is kind of like a modern day Dracula reimagining. We are following Dahlia, who after the death of her parents was raised in a witches guild, and she has been trained to hunt vampires. So she ends up getting an assignment to travel to Venice to kill Valtu, who is a he works at a music conservatory as a professor, and he is who Dracula is actually based off of. So when she gets there, she ends up having a bit of a attraction to Vaultu, and a romance soon begins. Now, what Dahlia does not realize is she might be the reincarnation of Vaultu's lost love, and the story goes from there. I will say the ending of this book, I did not see coming at all. I feel like September was filled with books with crazy, crazy endings, but I need to pick up the second book to this ASAP, so as soon as that audiobook drops, I will be reading it. And next up is one of the darkest books I've ever read, but also one of the best books I have ever read. It is Hills of Shivers and Shadows by Pam Godwin. So in this story, we are following Frankie, and she is abducted and then held captive by 4 men in this remote part of Alaska. And she has to survive this brutal winter in the company of these men. And as she finds out more about their past, she realizes that there is this dark presence that is manipulating their loyalties and really the driving force behind everything that's going on. And it goes from there. It's very hard to talk about this book without giving away spoilers. I feel like this is a book you need to experience for yourself. Please check trigger warnings. This book will not be for everyone. There is some very graphic and upsetting things that happen on page. I feel like the author did this for a reason, so you really were impacted by what is happening in this story. I've never read a book like this. I will find myself just thinking about this book randomly throughout the day, so it's almost like it's haunting me. But I did end up very much enjoying this book and cannot wait to pick up the sequel. I cried and bawled like a baby at the end of this book. This ending did have a very surprise ending, but also a very upsetting ending that I did not see coming. And I just cannot sing the praises enough of Pam Godwin. I just absolutely adore her writing and her books. And I'm eagerly anticipating the next book to release via audio. And next up is Lights Out. This is kind of like a dark stalker rom-com, very reminiscent of Butcher and Blackbird by Brynne Weaver. So in this story, we're following Allie, and she's a nurse who doesn't have time for much of a social life, but she's very into mask, on TikTok, watching masked guys do like sexy time. So anyway, one day she drinks a little bit too much wine, and she ends up messaging one of her favorite masked TikTokers looking for a real experience. So then we get Josh's perspective. He is the masked TikToker in question, and he has a bit of a kind of disturbing past, but he is very intrigued by Allie's text, and he decides that he's going to go for it, and it is their romance. And the night that ends up happening, there's some crazy shenanigans. There's a serial killer that gets involved. There's some mafia men, and it was such a wild but also really fun read. So I think I ended up giving this 3.5 of 4 stars. I will say the plot, it's a lot towards the middle. Like there's a lot of characters added and there's a lot going on. But overall, it was just really fun and the spice was excellent. So highly recommend. I feel like this is perfect for October. And of course, we all know by now that if Neva Altaj drops one of the Perfectly Imperfect Mafia romance audiobooks, I will read those books the day they release. And that is exactly what I did with Silent Lies. So I read this on release day. It is a new favorite in the series. I love this series so much. So in the story, we are following Sienna and then Drago. They are forced into this arranged marriage. However, Drago knows off the bat that Sienna is probably giving information to her dom. So he does not trust her. And it becomes even more hard to really get a good read on Sienna because she is so good at closing down and hiding her emotions. And that is what I absolutely loved about her. And then there is Drago, who obviously is afraid to open up to Sienna, knowing that she is possibly giving information to other people and his enemies, but also really wants to love her because there is so much about her to love. And Drago's also trying to hide the fact that he is partially deaf. And it is their romance, and it is so good. Please, if you have not read the Perfectly Imperfect Mafia romance series yet, it is my favorite of all time, and every single book I think I've rated either 4 or 5 stars. There have been no misses. I love this series. And next up was such a surprise favorite. So it's P.S. You're Intolerable. This was recommended to me from Jen from the Book Refuge. If you are not watching Jen's channel, highly recommend. I'll leave it down in the description below. She has the best romance book recommendations. But when she told me about this book, it did not sound like something I was going to enjoy. It is a billionaire contemporary romance. I don't gravitate towards those. However, I loved this. I loved the characters, and I was like giddy the entire time I was reading it. So the story is following Catherine, and Catherine finds her boss, Elliot, absolutely insufferable, to the point she actually writes these little notes on her like daily note card, pretty much saying like, P.S., I hate you, I hope your pillow is always warm, things like that, and then she rips it off before she gives it to him. So anyway, she has this like whole pile of evil notes that she keeps that makes her feel better about how much she hates her boss. Well, eventually her boss ends up finding out that she is pregnant and has no place to stay, and Catherine ends up moving in with Elliot, and slowly his demeanor starts to change a little bit, and it's their romance, and it's so good. I just loved how clueless Elliot was for the majority of like the first half of this book. He really just did not know how to show his affection and that he really was falling for Catherine, and I loved their dynamic. So once again, this was such a surprise, like favorite read, but highly recommend giving this book a chance. And this last book was my lowest rated book of the month, and I seriously consider not including it in this wrap-up just because I am so in the minority. I know people absolutely adore this book, so please do not let my review sway you from picking it up, but it is Wild Eyes by Elsie Silver. I ended up giving this only 3 stars, and that was kind of me being very nice. I probably was closer to a 2.5. I just didn't feel connected to these characters like so many other people did, and I just didn't love this nearly as much as the first book in this series. But in this story, we are following this country singer who is very high up in the Billboard charts, and she's looking for a little bit of solace. So she ends up going to this town where she ends up meeting Weston Belmont, and he's this single dad, and right away there's a lot of chemistry between them, and what starts out as like this little fling ends up being so much more, and they have this very deep connection, and they both are kind of trying to help heal each other, and the story goes from there. Now, on paper, I love single dad romances, and I had such high expectations for this because so many people were saying how emotional it was and how much it impacted them. But personally, for me, I didn't love the romance, and I didn't love this quite as much as the other books I read by this author. Now, I will 100% still be continuing with this series. I love Elsie Silver's writing. This was just a little bit of a miss for me. All right, guys, those were all the books I read in September. Please let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of the books I mentioned. And I'd like to say a special thank you to my Paladin protectors, Amanda, Erin, Leslie, Kat, and Lotta. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel. And I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye.